Great.
Yeah. All right. Welcome everyone out in virtual reality land. My name is Michael Naylor, and I'm the director of Enneagram Maine. And today I have the pleasure of having beloved Brad, a Type 5, with us to tell us about the agony and the ecstasy and everything in between of life as a Type 5. Where are you? Are you in San Francisco, or is that where you?
Just south. We're near Santa Cruz, and
Yeah,
Aptos. Yeah.
yeah, awesome. Well, so awesome to have you here, and
Thank you.
yeah, maybe just start with a little bit about how you discovered your fiveness, and then just see where it goes.
Sure. That's a good story. I'm not sure exactly how I backed into the Enneagram, but from my vague recollection, I went to a book signing with Helen Palmer. I think it was actually in Santa Cruz. This is long before I lived here the first time, which was back in the 90s. Um, but in any case, I went to a book signing of hers, and I think I don't know who recommended that I check it out, but anyway, I still have the book that she signed for me. It was just the normal thing that an author does, and for sure, I may have gone to a workshop before that, but the five definitely just grabbed me immediately. As you probably know, the five is the researcher or the observer or the investigator, and so that definitely fit with me. When I was a child, I was always reading books and building things and trying things out and tinkering and that sort of thing.
Mm.
Um, I think for me, there's a very strong sense of wanting to be capable and not rely on others in some way.
Mhm.
And so very much figuring it out and being able to do it on my own was always important when I was young, pre-adolescent. Um, and so, yeah, and then I've always read a lot of books, and always researched things. I think probably I would say my first real love of observation, or having that feeling of really um, uh, connection with that part of myself, was when I was in high school. There was a computer center at the high school, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. I'm pretty good at math, but I'm not like a super scientist, or it was never, but I took this programming class, and really just thought, wow, how fascinating. There's something that you can program that will do what you tell it to. It's like an extension of me, so to
Uh-huh.
speak. You can get it to do what you want. This is back when most people, most kids didn't know a lot about computers back then. Nowadays it's very different, of course. But anyway, so that's kind of a connection to my five side. Is I'm a software engineer now. I ended up going to school and getting a degree in computer science and that sort of thing. But I think that's probably typical of a lot of fives, is being able, in some sense, they say that software engineers are it's a very lazy profession, because you can get the computer to do what you want it to, and therefore you don't have to do it yourself, right? Of course, it's a lot of work to actually get it to do what you want it to, but once you do, then it saves you a lot of time. So in some sense, that's a good description maybe of me. um, so
Well, when you were a little guy, like grade school, high school, sometimes fives will have a story that they felt well, that they not only that, like the Type 4 will say, well, I got the wrong family. The Type 5 will say, I got the wrong planet. It can feel like I don't quite fit into the conventional thinking of people around me. And did you experience that when you were a little guy? The feeling of sort of got the wrong planet, and that people aren't so very smart here, and I gotta get smart and take care of myself, and anything like that?
um, that's an interesting question. My father is also very intelligent, And so is my mother for that matter. But he was he's an 8 for sure.
Mm,
And so he was very much, he kind of dominated the household, so to speak.
mhm,
Um, so perhaps my need to uh, understand things came from, some sort of wanting uh, a, a solace or respite or protection from that, dominance, so to speak. Um, my mother's a 2.
mm,
I guess that's a typical pairing, an 8 and a 2.
mhm.
And so in terms of feeling apart, I think I had a very, um, I want to say, a rich inner world, with reading and whatnot. Like I said, I read a lot, and I
Mhm.
found, like, I was notorious for sneaking into bed with a flashlight, and my parents would say I had to go to bed, and then I would, read with a flashlight for hours, and then and then sleep in the morning. So I've always been a night person, a night owl, and not a morning person.
Mm.
And So yeah, and I don't know what it was about reading, other than, sort of maybe escape to some degree. So yeah, along those lines.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder, sometimes what we call the investigator, the intense cerebral type,
Hmm.
meaning that they have a very intense inner world that collects information and has I remember Russ saying that it's like it's like his thoughts are kind of electric. They're not like soft meandering things like a type 9 might have, but they're like,
Hmm.
really kind of laser like electrified. And some fives have said, yeah, my inner world is richly textured and it's like alive and exciting. That coming out into reality can kind of be a letdown because it's just so vibrant in my head.
Yeah.
Anything you experience any of that?
Yeah. So I have a definite intensity to my intellectual curiosity. And
Mhm.
sometimes that I've definitely gotten a lot of feedback from people that can sometimes be off-putting. Like, to me, when someone says something, I say, "Oh, really? What about this?" And I get excited,
Mm.
and it may feel a bit like the Inquisition for me, maybe,
Mhm.
um, or like I'm like, yeah. So there's an intensity, mainly from the passion that I feel for understanding and the ideas, and all that. So I think, uh, for sure, I don't know about electricity, but I definitely get the feedback, and I can see that. uh, I don't know why people don't get as excited as me, or don't find the pursuit of the truth as satisfying as it is for me. I think
Mhm.
sometimes people think, "Oh, well, that's too picky or something," but I'm like, no, I want to get past the picky. I want to understand all the minuteness. When I can
Yeah.
really understand the details, then we can have wide-ranging philosophical discussions about what it means and all that. But until we have a base of understanding, it's very hard to get to that. So I
Yeah.
think I'm misunderstood sometimes. It feels like I feel like there's so much that I'm listening to, all of the detail, and yet I'm also looking at the forest as well. So I'm able to do both.
Yeah.
And I think it throws people. I think there are those with whom I interact that, being so precise, they all of a sudden are thinking about that, and then they lose sight of the, and so I discombobulate people, or I throw them off
Mhm.
sometimes, I
Mhm.
think. And so, but I'm not thrown off. And so it's a in terms of feeling alien, sometimes it is a bit of getting used to that. Like, really, I've had to really work at hearing people and letting them have their own process of exploration. it,
Mm.
it, not always, sort of forcing my 5 mode of collecting all the pieces. Oh, well, that means this and that, and now we can jump back here, but, well, what about
Mhm.
this detail, and now let's go back here. And
Mm.
pretty soon, it's a little much, I guess, for some. And then there's others for whom I can do that with, like at work. There's a lot of other 5s at work, in
Oh.
software development. So they tend to be okay with that, although sometimes even there, it can feel like I perhaps I think I've gotten the feedback that sometimes it feels like I am jumping, like I'm seeing 2 or 3 paces down the road that others aren't. And when you
Mhm.
jump there, it kind of takes away the fun for them to discover it. So,
Okay.
so
So,
that's something as a 5 that maybe is a 5. Maybe that's a 5 characteristic. Yeah.
well, it sure resonates with the idea of fives having a kind of natural gift for synthesizing complex ideas, and like you,
Mm-hmm.
like the bigger picture and then a detail that goes back in
Yeah.
the bigger picture. It's really, and not everybody can do that, right? It's just, it's like, you know, how you're hardwired, which is
Yeah.
it's just what you inherited, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, and you know, fives are often very quick at understanding things and seeing the paradigm, or just all of a sudden kind of a flash of awareness around how a pattern's operating. And not everybody, you know, the rest of us are kind of plodding along trying to collect the information, and we're, you know, we're like a couple light years behind. So
Well, I don't know about
so
that, but yeah.
one of the stories about the five sometimes is that because they're, you know, they have that hunger, curiosity to find out, like, how does this work? Like, how, what's the, you know, let's go all the way down to the bottom stone and find out how this all works. Is that they can get sort of magnetized and carried up into the head center and can forget the rest of their body and heart. It's like, it's kind of like, well, my body's a taxi cab to drive my head around, right? Or, I mean,
Right.
that's sort of the
Yeah.
joke. But how? What have you noticed about your relationship with your body or your emotions?
Yeah. So that's a really good question, because I've often said that I love body work, like massage,
Mm,
because it gets me out of my head.
yeah.
And in general, anytime I can have some tactile
Hmm.
uh, anything, it feels balancing, because it naturally pulls me out of my thinking.
Yeah.
And that's actually so anyway, um, that's a great counterbalance, to get, like, I like really deep, like, when really deep deep tissue massage, and like almost like Rolfing kind of stuff, really stuff that really, because it's just a focus, you just learn to breathe, and it gives me a respite from my mind.
Hmm.
um, in the same way, I like to sail. I'm a sailor.
Oh,
And to me, an ideal sport is one where you are doing just enough, there's just enough to think about, that your mind kind of turns off. So with sailing, there's the main sheet and the jib and the wind, and the wind's always sort of slightly shifting. So you're doing, but it's not a taxing thing. It's a
mhm,
very relaxing, and then you're out on the water, and the wind and all that, and, animals, whatever in the ocean.
mm,
So I enjoy that, because it sort of gives me that just enough to keep my mind busy with things, but yet I'm enjoying the outdoors.
mm,
So that's another
mm.
thing. But yeah, but the body thing, when you mentioned about the body, definitely, to me, that's one way to get out of my head. Uh,
Well,
Massage, body work, sex, all those things get me out of my head.
that's important. That's what, so how do you work out, exercise, lift weights, anything like that, or you know, long distance runners?
I'm not so much. I would have to say I'm probably more sedentary than anything. My wife, who's a 9, actually says I can outdo her in the laziness department, surprisingly. So she does get me going. Sometimes we hike or go walk on the beach. I enjoy walking and that sort of
Mhm,
thing.
mhm.
And we're actually been doing a program of high intensity training 4 days a week when I can get dragged down to do it. Um, but exercise for exercise sake has never seemed like a smart idea to me. I would rather do something like play racquetball, or
Mhm,
do something that actually gives me exercise, like, or walk, or something that's more enjoyable.
mhm,
So I'm sort of a utilitarian in that way.
mhm, Mhm.
I did used to play a lot of racquetball when I was younger, so that was fun because you basically run around as much as possible to try to hit the bouncing ball, and so you get a lot of exercise, but it's also kind of fun, and there's a little
Mm.
competition to it as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I've
Well,
done some tennis in later life, but haven't done a lot of that lately. So yeah.
yeah, I've had a couple of friends who are fives who would say that sometimes accessing emotions has been a real uh, growth curve for them. That their tendency when something happens that might be emotionally sad or upsetting would be to go analyze it first, to analyze the sadness and maybe not get to feeling it. It's like there's the doorway from the head to the heart. Sometimes it can feel like quite a distance. And I can remember one of my friends whose dad had recently died of alcoholism, and he had taken to rehab dozens of times, and he finally died. And I asked him, I said, you must just be heartbroken. And he said, well, I know I should feel sad. I've read about it and I know that there should be something here, but I'm just more up in my head thinking about it. And I just don't really know how to
Hmm.
get down here. So I don't know, what has your experience been of your heart and emotions and the growth experiences you've had?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know if you do much with the subtypes,
Yeah.
Michael?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm a one-on-one or
Okay.
sexual subtype. So I tend to be more of a personal relationship type guy rather than more of a social or a
Yeah.
self-pres, which I think the self-pres five is more the really uh, you know, maybe more protected or more satisfied with just that. Um, so I'll just throw that flavor in.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of totally resonates with me about emotions. Uh, I what is there to be said about that? um, for me, coming to grips with my feelings with another person, like with my wife or with other close friends, the intimacy required usually needs a lot of time
Mm-hmm.
and space, and so it's really important, especially with someone who's more adept with their emotions and with their communications, like to talk,
Mm-hmm.
to stop and just let there be silence between us, and then
Mm.
I can begin to talk more.
Yeah.
um, it's hard when I think they feel like they want to fill in the blanks or something, and then
Mm.
pretty soon I'm in my head again instead of maybe feeling. I mean, I've
Yeah.
kind of learned this over time.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, being able to um, explore feelings requires uh, enough time and enough listening,
Mm-hmm.
really hearing what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. I don't think I'm being super clear here, but
Well,
um,
but so let me
space. It requires a lot of space,
yeah, yeah.
because I think um, without it, like if someone asks me a question, then I will immediately go into my mental mode, right? And so there's a different rhythm, I think, for me for emotion that requires uh, an asking, and then I'll give a little answer, and then I'll sit with it for a minute, and you got to really let me
Mm-hmm.
kind of feel it
Mm.
first. But definitely, so that's one piece that I'll say that I've learned later in life. Earlier on, I would say definitely emotions seemed like inconveniences and to be kind of dealt with and not argued away or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I definitely resonate with that as well. But I have found that when I'm trying to talk about harder things, the thing that's most difficult is when it feels like I'm about ready to share something, then it kind of gets cut off usually by people. So I don't know if you're in a relationship with a five, maybe try really stopping and and not saying anything, just letting the silence be okay, and then they will fill it in eventually, and maybe that'll allow more intimacy or more emotion to emerge in a conversation with a 5. That would be my little tip.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're gonna do tips for 5s. That's one of them. I'll be on my list.
Yeah.
So for you, what have been the challenges you know in being a type 5 and being in the world and being with others who weren't 5s? Like what have you noticed as the challenges for you?
Well, we talked about the intensity already.
Yeah.
And I think and we just started to touch on this this idea that if folks ask me a question of logic, in other words, if they say, well, what about this, then they're going to get an answer in that regard. So if they I think the challenge for me has been to hear the question behind the question. That's very hard for a 5. And so again, I don't feel like I'm being very clear.
Well, it sounds like you pick up on the literal part of the question, but maybe don't read what is underneath it. Yeah. So.
And I think the way I would describe it is, and then they complain because I'm not, I'm thinking of like a primary relationship, a girlfriend or wife. It's what's been a challenge for me is when they ask for a particular thing, like a feeling or what's going on, and then I get pulled back into the intellectual realm, which is, even if they're very specific, they don't want a solution, then somehow their language pattern returns to the language pattern of asking for a solution. And so then I say, well, I'm just trying to hear what you're saying, but that push and pull between saying they want to be heard and then sort of interjecting little tidbits of fact or dispute is very difficult, because I have to I get pulled between those two. With my with communication skills workshops or whatever, I mean, I've learned how it's important to basically, someone says something, you hear what they say, you sort of repeat back in your own words what they say. Did I get it right? That sort of stuff. And then they start to relax and feel heard, and then you start to have more rapport and more emotional intimacy. But then it'll take a turn, and it's very difficult for a 5 to hear, like they say, well, because of this, then that, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute, let's stop and question the because of this, because I don't think it really is this. Let's examine all the ramifications of this. And then pretty soon they're not feeling heard. It feels like there's an argument or a discussion. So so that's been a challenge. And I think there's one of the techniques for relationship stuff that we use is imago theory. I don't know if you know much about imago theory, but basically one of the teachers that we've had on that says that the long way is the short way, and it's their way of saying that if you stick to the formula, no matter how much they try to draw you in to out of the, so you're saying this, and and that makes you feel this way. As soon as you go into the argumentative or the factual stuff, it ends up taking much longer. Although it feels excruciating to a 5 in particular, it feels excruciating to stick with the, so you're saying this, and that makes you feel this way. And they say, yeah, and then they ask a question, And you say, oh, so so you're feeling like you're questioning, like to stick with not answering their question, but to actually hear what they're saying
Yeah.
is excruciating, especially for a 5, because it requires not doing what they're actually saying in language, but actually seeing this deeper thing behind it. And if you do that, this is the long way is the short way. If you do that excruciating thing of continually doing that, eventually they feel heard and it short circuits it all. But as soon as you jump into the question, then
Mm-hmm.
then it actually becomes then you have to start over. So it's basically when they say the long way is the short way, it feels like the long way because it's excruciating, but it actually ends up being a much shorter way to resolve the emotional
Yeah.
import of the conversation. So I would say that's super hard for 5s, at least for this particular 5, a one-on-one 5 like me, that it's very hard for me to hear what someone's saying. And in some way, I guess it's sort of I guess it's a deeper understanding. I don't want to say it's a parental thing or it's a I know better, because that's not an equal partnership either. But it's a deeper understanding of what people really need than
Mm.
what their language patterns say. So that's
Yeah.
tough for a 5 to do. That's a big challenge for a 5.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you really pick up on the nuances of language and whether it's conflicting with what they said before. And it's like, well, wait a second, let's get the truth of this and explore that. And
Yeah, and that's not what they're wanting. They're not wanting the truth. They're wanting to have a connection, right? I mean,
yeah,
and we all do. I mean, I do too. The
yeah.
way I do it is different than others. The way I do it is by getting this common ground that then we can really explore what it means or feels, or wow, this is exciting. And that's when I get passionate or teary or
Mm, mm,
or you know excited, happy, sad, whatever, is when I can really feel like that's complete, that we've really explored all that. And
mm.
and so I just have to know that there are at least 8 other types, or whatever, 9 times 3, 26 other types or whatever,
Yeah.
that
Well,
do it a little differently than me.
yeah, yeah. Well, communication is challenging with even ones that are the same type. But so, one of the things you've already mentioned is you get excited and curious about the truth.
Yeah.
And one of the stories we hear about the 5 is that they have a pretty good memory for the things they are studying. It's like they collect information, and that sometimes, remember one 5 I was talking to, he said, if someone's interested in my ideas, I'll give them everything. And so he said, with my fiance, I say, do you want the short version or the long version? And she says, the short version would be great, right? But
Yeah.
so what is your relationship to sharing what you're passionate about? And do you notice that sometimes you can overwhelm people with all of your wisdom, or do you have to be tactful about it? I mean, what's been true for you?
Yeah, I mean, as I age and get older, I think there is definitely a soft touch that can be learned around suggesting certain things or encouraging others to suggest things rather than suggesting them myself. Um, I'm thinking like in meetings, business meetings or whatever. Um, I would say most of the time now, because I work with a lot of 5 types,
Mm,
for the most part, I'm sharing more human intuition and wisdom and how to work with others who are also probably 5s, right? I work in a milieu, a stew of many 5s, all
really?
lots of ideas and passion, and how to not upset others who also have interesting ideas and passion. So I find myself in a little more of a elder statesman kind of role
Uh-huh.
with those who have those ideas. So that's in the work environment. Um, I'm sorry. Repeat the question. You're sort of
Uh,
asking about how I share my passion, but in a
well,
way that doesn't overwhelm.
it went to something that feels more current, which is just like, here you are, you work with these 5s,
Yeah.
and uh, that for some folks could be really challenging. But you know what? How do you use your sort of understanding of the five and working with other fives and helping them and supporting them? I mean, you know, what lessons would you have for the world? I mean, I know we're going global here, so let's just go back to the, like, what's it like to work with a bunch of fives? And yeah, how do you do it?
Yeah. I mean, I love it because it's exciting, right? It's fun to talk with all of them. You know, I try to give them a lot of space. Like when they talk, I just stop, and you know, you'll be in. It's interesting what will fill a blank space. I think that's with a five. I think you should give them that time.
Hmm.
So that's, you know, we've already covered that.
Mhm.
And uh, I mean, in some ways, it also relates to the actual, you know, software. I don't know if most people may or may not be aware if you're not a programmer, but software is just layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. It's all layers. The whole thing is layers.
Hmm.
So it's there's a detail level, and then there's a slightly bigger detail level, and then a slightly bigger. So it's exactly what we were talking about how you jump from
Hmm.
the forest to the trees, you know. And so
Hmm.
there's there's the grains of dirt there and the little bits of root and mushroom that are on the forest floor, and then there's trunks and there's branches and there's, you know, there, at every level you can um, build something or improve something or do something creative or different.
Hmm.
So in some sense, I would say not getting lost in that is, that's basically my job, is to
Hmm. Hmm.
essentialize. Like you could spend your life at any layer, right, just improving and tinkering
Yeah.
forever, and so that's not real productive for the business usually. So
Hmm.
figuring out how to harness the passion and the interest in all the details but
Hmm.
not getting lost in those details is important in working with fives. um,
Hmm.
so when you scope it to the passion that they're feeling, why
Hmm.
are you, you know, this is really cool that you're really interested in this small part. How do we connect that to something bigger? And then they get passionate about that as well. Then they naturally will not get lost in the minutia, but actually build bigger and more interesting things that are useful for others, right? That's what a business is about, building stuff that's useful for other people. So yeah, so I think connecting the connecting the layers or connecting the levels of abstraction are is an important thing for a five in order to feel a passion for something that's more whole and less detailed,
Hmm.
if that
Okay.
helps. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so it points to one of the stories we hear about five sometimes is that they can get lost in their tinkering world
Yeah.
and forget to bring the idea back to landing it on the earth, right?
Yeah.
And or that there's a tendency sometimes because they want all the information to wait a long time before they come out with what they think is the solution. It's like they haven't, you know, discovered all the details of it, and they feel, you know, like a. Sometimes I'll hear in business meetings people say, "Well, Tom, the Type 5, he knows more than any of us here, but he won't tell us what it is because he feels like it's not ready yet." And so there's that kind of over preparation sometimes. But
Yeah.
it sounds like you oversee and help create kind of a container for that with the people you work with.
Yeah. What I always say is I want to have a complete working solution as small as possible, right?
Mm,
Let's
mm,
have an end to end where someone else can see the result, even though it's just barely usable. It's
mhm,
something that's complete in itself, and then we can start to build that out into the grand vision that you have that has all the little, you know, Rube
mm,
Goldberg connections and all that sort of stuff. But let's start small, and that means there's a communication with the end user or the customer or the person who's consuming what they're building, right? If
mm,
they're just building it in isolation, um, usually what you end up is with something that the person doesn't really want, right? You build this huge contraption and they go, well, I didn't quite mean that. It's like, oh, now I got to rebuild the whole, start over again. Whereas if you start with something really small, you show it to them, they go, oh, this is kind of cool, but it doesn't
Oh,
quite do it. And you've only spent, a week doing it, or a day or an hour. And then
yeah.
they go, okay. And then you tweak it a little bit and then it grows, but it grows based on feedback. And so that's
Mm,
very satisfying to a 5. So I think
mm,
making that connection between making the scope really small, like just the smallest, teeniest little thing. There's a term for it in business: lean development, or the minimal viable product, just the little teeniest thing that you can make, and then
mm,
get a little feedback, and then start making, and then grow it from there. So
yeah.
with software, that's quite easy because software is malleable, right? It's not something physical. It's not like when you're building something out of aluminum, cast aluminum or something, you do need to actually build it about the size you want it. You can't start small and then add more aluminum later. So with hardware, it's a little different. But with software, you very much can start with something more simple and then
Mm,
make it adapt to what the person wants more. So I think in general, you could think of, if you want to think about relationships or sports or hobbies or whatever, you can think of that as well with 5s. If they're off, certainly in the work environment, if they're off building something, make sure they build something small first and get feedback on it. And then it'll still be exciting for them because they'll get feedback, and that'll also be exciting. Then they can add all their great ideas after,
mm,
as
mm.
an evolutionary process to that.
Yeah. Well, I wanted, can we take just a 2-minute break? I'm going to
Sure.
put us on pause. I'll be
Sure.
right back. Okay.
Okay.
Here we go. So
Great.
we're back. And yeah, so one of the things we haven't talked about is that, sometimes 5s under stress um, will start to get more anxious and withdraw and sort of go into uh, their inner space capsule or their
Mhm.
kingdom of thought, and can then, as they're more afraid or feeling vulnerable, can get more studious and also more, in a sense, controlling around who can have access to them. And so there can be almost mm, a way that they withdraw and go in and try to analyze things, intensely, as a way of feeling safe and secure, and and also at the same time begin to have more fear and phobic, suspicious kind of thoughts, like, "Who, I can't trust people here. It's a crazy world." And I wondered, for you, when you're under stress, do you notice that you have in the past or even now will withdraw and sort of go into your own withdrawn cocoon, or what's true for you?
Um, yeah, under stress, like I'm thinking, like, finals week in school or big project that's due, I tend to find myself shift being very as I mean, I'm already attention deficit disordered already as a 5, right?
Mhm.
But I do that even more. I keep shifting from one thing to another thing to another thing, doing many different things. I mean, this is the classic 5 goes to 7 under stress.
Yes.
So I tend to do lots of things at a very surface level and not get anything done. Basically,
Oh,
doing a lot of things and accomplishing nothing. And
yes.
that's a very common pattern for me when I'm feeling totally overwhelmed. Is I'll try
Yeah.
to solve it. I'll try to solve it. I'll keep trying to solve it and never, until that kind of either I implode or whatever, that I get completely overwhelmed. I feel it. I think it's similar to, I think in some sense 5s are probably all a little bit on the spectrum of of Aspergery, autism, just because they're a 5. They're a little more in touch with that, even if they aren't officially on that spectrum. And
Mhm.
so I think when I get under stress, I think about the classic, autistic, trying to
Mhm.
block out all the external stimuli, but
Mhm.
also feeling very frantic and kind of shifting around to everything, kind of doing the little dilettante thing of doing little bits of everything in a copy, Jack, master of all, jack of none, or whatever that is, jack of all trades, master of none, I guess
Yeah,
is the
yeah.
term. So yeah, so very much I feel like I do that, and I do have to try to stop and just take a break, like sleep or do something to short to stop that circuit from taking from happening.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. There's a movie called Shine, which is about a
Jeffrey
pianist.
Rush. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I think it was David Helcott was a type 5 who went through a lot of stress, and then a classical pianist, and then just went into 7 mode and was hyper, and it came
Mhm.
through as rapid speaking and thinking at the same time. And so it sounds like your attention just scatters, and you're like a hummingbird. You go to this and that and this and that, but there's no sort of line into, grounding an idea.
Yeah.
Uh, and so do you notice then when you're in that frantic mode that you tend to, like a 7, not sleep as much and be sort of activated in your head center and excited about ideas, or is that just a part of being a 5 also?
Um, I don't know about excited about ideas. It feels like I'm a little bit, I mean, panic might be a little too strong a word, but I'm a little bit um, not accomplishing. Like I feel this strong sense of like, I can't focus on this. I can't get this done. All right. So I set that aside and I try something else and I can't focus on that either. So it's a bit of a can't focus
Mm-hmm,
feeling.
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm,
and so that's disconcerting. So then you try something else. And I think what really needs to happen is some kind of rest, some kind of,
mm-hmm.
you know, uh, recuperation. And then it's the old, the one that actually my wife Susie says a lot. She says, you need to, as they instruct you on the airplane, you need to put on your mask first, and then you're breathing oxygen, then you can help your child. If you're trying to get your child on and you're kind of feeling loopy and you're trying to get so you got to take care of yourself in order to take care of others, in order to help others. Of course, a 2 would love to hear that, right? um, it's hard for them to probably put their mask on first as well, but in some sense it's like that for a 5. You can't solve when you're in that state, when you're stressed and you're overwhelmed, you can't solve your way out of it. You need to take a different approach. You need to stop and go take a nap or whatever, and then take a breath and not feel pressured. It's usually under pressure. I mean, I don't know if 5s are classically procrastinators, but I'm a classic procrastinator. So there's something about the intensity of the deadline coming up that makes me do my best work or whatever. So I keep recreating that situation. And sometimes it gets to be too much if it's finals or there's too many things you're trying to process and learn all at once. um, so yeah, so giving yourself a break. I don't know. I mean, I could make platitudes about how, planning ahead or whatever. It doesn't work for me because I need the deadline or whatever. Um,
Yeah.
so
So
yeah.
have you? Is it part of your journey to have a meditation practice, anything like that, that you've been drawn to?
That's a good question. So one other thing I was going to say when we first started this was that I kind of backed into the Enneagram through spiritual practice originally,
Hmm.
through meditation and whatnot, and that's where I got interested. I don't know who recommended uh, Helen Palmer at some point back then. So yeah, so I got interested in it through that, and then I ended up doing a lot of meditation. So I've actually done quite a bit in my time, mostly the Tibetan Buddhist variety, but any Vipassana as well.
Hmm.
Anything that is based on the breath usually works pretty well. And um, so what more is there to say about that?
Well,
I
in terms of,
probably have incorporated it into my body and my life.
mhm.
I don't have a regular practice now, but I can touch that state of mind that's more it's interesting. It's kind of like, I think 5s are attracted to meditation because it's about observing things, right? But it's, in some sense, it's about observing without something to observe, right? It's observing without processing facts.
Yes, just
And
noticing.
so it's
Mhm.
just the pure, yeah, it's just the pure noticing. And so in some sense, very counterintuitive, and most fives probably initially are very difficult with it, but it's also a challenge to them. So they think, okay, I want to try to solve this, see if I can figure it out. So yeah, I think it can be good as long as it doesn't become an obsession, probably. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's one spiritual teacher who's a type 5, Almas, A.H. Almas. Have you heard it? And,
Yeah.
and in the spirit of the type 5, he writes, voluminous books on the details, microscopic details of the psyche and the soul, and just burrows down and down and down and down, and then comes back out and says, and the main thing is to follow your breath and sense your body, and just be with whatever arises. And then in the meantime, if you want to go explore the kingdom, you can read my books and go into the depth of minutia, and that might help you. If you're a type 5, it will surely cheer you up, right? So do you have any authors that you've been drawn to that you go, oh, I love this writing? There's, 5-ish or not necessarily.
Wow, that's a good question. So I'll tell you something that a teacher, a lama of mine, told me once. He said, you should really investigate Madhyamaka philosophy, the Buddhist philosophy known as Madhyamaka. And I said, oh, really? And so then, of course, he knew exactly what he was doing, right? As a 5, I went in and all the minutiae. And basically, it's the original, the sort of the originator of this school of philosophy in Buddhism is Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna was around, I want to say, somewhere around 400 or 500 AD, I believe. So, and basically, it's the philosophy of emptiness, which is this concept of all things are essentially constructs in language. And so anyway, if you really want to dive deep, you can read up on Madhyamaka. There's a great translation of Nagarjuna's work by an author, J. Garfield. It's called The Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way. And I really like his interpretation of Nagarjuna. So anyway, I would recommend J. Garfield's The Fundamental Wisdom of the Middle Way, I think is the name of the book. But anyway, so if you're looking for a very deep dive into Buddhist philosophy, I think that it resonates. I think the reason my teacher said, oh, you should learn everything you can about it. He was kind of like a mischievous coyote, saying, oh, go, because he could see my mind was looking at all the details of everything. And it's basically when you get done investigating all you can about Madhyamaka, all of a sudden you get an intuition of emptiness, of that state of observing without observing anything. And so it's a way for the mind to get busy with all of the philosophical implications, and then at some point you kind of go, whoa. It's kind of like you just kind of are there over that abyss between 4 and 5, right? If you look at the Enneagram diagram, there's that abyss. And I think Madhyamaka can take you right to the edge of that, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like a little bit of vertigo for your mind, and your mind kind of stops. And that's the meditative state you're trying to achieve. And so by telling a 5 to go read Madhyamaka or Nagarjuna or whatever, you are encouraging them to get so immersed in the concepts that the concepts just go bing and they kind of disappear. So
awesome. Well, so it sounds like you've been very passionate about your Buddhist journey and learning and all of that. It sounds like you have your own library inside you of things you've read. Instead, it seems like it's been a big part of your joy. I mean, just an excitement. I mean, so I want to say, tell me more. This is like really fascinating material. One of my favorite teachers of all time is Pema Chodron, who's was a Shambhala Buddhism. But so it's not like what's sounds like you studied a number of different or had different teachers.
Yeah, yeah. One of the other really profound uh, techniques for me is this concept of giving and taking, it's called. I'm trying
Uh-huh.
to remember now the
Is
name of
that
it.
what is that?
Tonglen.
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 Yeah,
Tonglen, yeah.
tell me your understanding of that, if you would.
So the idea is that you visualize anything unhappy or negative or
Painful.
displeasurable to someone else. You try to essentially visualize sucking all that into yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so you're sort of taking their negativity in, and by in the process of taking it in, purifying it in yourself.
Hmm.
And then you're taking all that's good in you, all the passion and love and excitement and um, equanimity, this feeling of dropping your mind and seeing, emptiness as it is, so
Mm-hmm.
to speak, being in relationship with that, all that great stuff, and giving it back to the other person. So it's sort of the ultimate sacrifice. It's the kind of thing that would maybe be tricky for a 2, but for a 5, I found it to be really powerful.
Mm.
So this idea of you take in like someone's cancer and you give them back all of your health,
Mm-hmm.
or it's a very counterintuitive thing, but it works. It kind of inoculates your ego in some way,
Mm.
because you're trying to relieve them and give them what you have that's good. And
Mm.
there's something about that that takes me out of my mind as well. And
Wow.
it's a little bit of a wait a minute, but won't you get sick or something? Wow,
Mm-hmm.
if you actually got sick by taking someone else's cancer and giving them your health, wouldn't that be like a miracle? Wouldn't that like disprove things in science? Wouldn't that be fascinating if it really did work? Of course, I think it does, because you end up doing things that do help that person, right? Just your being there helps
Mm.
them, right? There's certainly a mind body connection in health and all that sort of stuff. So, but
Mm.
you don't, anyway. So I find all that fascinating. There's a really great little book. One of the persons who first um, uh, taught this technique of taking in others' negativity and giving out your own positivity, essentially, was Atisha. Atisha was a great, actually Indian saint who lived in Indonesia at the time, and anyway developed this technique of Tonglen. And there's a book on it by MacLeod, and
Oh, yeah, McLeod.
I can't remember the name of the book right now, but I can send it to you later if you want to put it in the link or something.
Yeah.
Um, but another great description, really short description of Tonglen, is in Sogyal Rinpoche's book, The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. I
Oh,
think
yeah. Yeah.
it's the chapter on compassion.
Yeah.
I want to say chapter 9, but I could be wrong. It might be another chapter number. But anyway, so he has a really great description. It's not very long. It's like a few pages. You can read about it, and he has a really great description of how you do this visualization. But then MacLeod's book actually goes into lots of detail on it, and it's a very short book. It's very thin. It's maybe 85 pages or something. It's a very short little book on it. It's a
Yeah.
translation of Atisha. So I like
Ah.
both of those, both MacLeod's translation of Atisha as well as the chapter in
Mm.
Sogyal Rinpoche's book, The Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. So
Yeah.
both of those are really good if you want to learn Tonglen. I don't know if it's particular to 5s, but it might be. It's one technique that,
Mm.
in addition to studying the philosophy, that in addition to just doing the normal, meditation, that I find really useful.
Well, I know Pema Chodron really talks about that as one of the central
Yes.
practices, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think my guess is that she's a type 9.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, in Tibetan Buddhism, that's the Shambhala at least, and sure, across the board. I haven't read much about it in Zen practice, but there's always something akin to it. But I was just sort of chuckling to myself, it seems to me that the types that like that gap between the 4 and the 5, or like it's like the emptiness, like, oh wow, the emptiness. This is this is like a portal of some kind. I've been waiting. Could you put one of those in my house, like a portal of emptiness, so I can go through it from time to time?
Right.
I saw a cartoon about that recently. It was hilarious, but Yeah, it sounds like you've really went into the depths of study around all of this, and like
Yeah.
a lot of beloved fives, they've got a lot of good book recommendations. Like there's this one, this one
Yeah,
right
Ken,
here.
it's Ken McLeod, by the way. The first
Yes,
name of the author is Ken. Yeah, Ken
yes,
McLeod. Yeah.
yes. Pema Chodron recommended one of his books that she really liked. He wrote it about 4 or 5 years ago. I thought it was
Yeah, it might
really,
even be. I think one I'm thinking of is much older than that, but yeah, yeah,
yeah.
maybe back. Yeah.
Yeah, I really liked him. He seemed very grounded and down to earth. So, well, good stuff. Good stuff. And
Yeah,
I'm glad. Great to get a taste of your passion for spirituality and all,
yeah, yeah.
and your depth studies. And so
I,
maybe go ahead.
I was just going to say, I did want to say that we didn't really talk about wings much.
Well, let's
But
do.
I was thinking when you were talking about the void, I mean, people probably know from watching your podcast, you're a 4 and I'm
Yeah.
a 5. So we have that between us, right? Between you're in Maine and I'm in California. I mean, we have this void, we have this space between
Yeah.
the 4 and the 5. But I did want to say that my wing is a 6. And what I always say is I have a counterphobic 6 wing. So I have very much a challenge authority, wing to me. Not so much a 4, I don't think. Although I think you can always sort of swing a little both ways. But my wing really is my counterphobic 6 nature. So anyway, I just thought I would throw that in. And for me, that manifests in challenging ideas, challenging orthodoxy. I do it from a 5 point of view, but that's where it comes in. I'm not. I love slaying sacred cows, and I find humor that does that. Like South Park or things where they just really slay all those things really to be funny, and so.
Yeah. Well, I think South Park is really five-ish in so many ways, and just so absurdly laughing at convention and just coming up
Yeah.
with, you know, what often is said about the fives is they have kind of this dark humor, and in South Park they're always cutting each other's heads off and they fall on the
Yeah.
ground and they put it back on. And
Kenny, yeah.
Kenny, yeah. So any other sort of five-ish, six-ish stuff? Like were you ever drawn to like Harry Potter? Was that anything that was a part of there's a lot of five-ishness there, or?
Yeah. No, I mean, all those stories are great. I've never been much of a fantasy or science fiction person. I've become much more of a science fiction person being married to my wife, who's a total Trekkie.
Uh-huh.
And so I've grown to love like Next Generation, Picard and all that whole thing. I think was done very well and really sort of showed off Roddenberry's vision for a utopian, future for humanity. And so that's interesting because I was always too like, oh, the science is wrong, or something, or, so that's hard for a 5, right? So
Yeah.
really good science fiction, I guess, transcends that, but maybe I was never patient enough to get into it. I love any fiction that explores, motivations and characters, at a deep level. There's a whole series of legal, political kind of thriller type ones by Richard North Patterson. So I've read his whole series of all of his novels. So those are kind of fun. They've always been fun. But that's about an attorney. So it's interesting. I'm an interesting 5 and an interesting engineer because I am a one-on-one. I'm not a self-pres 5. And I've always found myself not usually actually doing the minutia of building things, but I'm often between the engineers and the rest of the organization trying to help the engineers create things. And I also I probably would have been a good attorney, but it probably would have been a little too much people skill that I'm interested in. So I probably am, probably engineer is where I really fit, the software engineer, but I do understand law and how laws evolve and, the whole language aspect of that, which is interesting. But then you got to deal with people, which is kind of like, who wants to deal with people, Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to. You were sort of wrapping up there, but I was throwing the counterphobic 6 and
let in another question. So how what would you say about the one-on-one sexual instinct? How does that show up? But sounds like intensity, deep connection, meaningful. I mean, I don't
For me, I think it's that I would much rather have 3 really super close buds than have, you know, 20 people that I try to get around to, equally or something. So to me, and I feel that same way about travel. I like to go to a country and spend like 3 weeks in the country, or a month or longer, and really get to know some local little micro economy or microclimate of that country and understand the culture from the inside out, rather than spend 3 days in London and 4 days in Paris and 2 days in Rome. And to me, that's the downside of being that's the doing the 7 thing. I'd much rather
Yeah.
be somewhere and really feel it and understand it, and then come back later next year, go to the other place. Go to London for 3 weeks, and then the next year go to Paris for 2 weeks or whatever.
Yeah.
So anyway, so that's my approach to travel. I guess we were talking about what were we talking about? And I said that's the same way that I travel as well.
Well,
anyway,
the sexual
to dive in, yeah, one-on-one. So I'd rather have a few close friends and not a lot of that's where I would say social is my lowest one. So I'm definitely one-on-one, and then probably self-pres. I get very tired at parties or at events where everybody's talking. I just want to go in the other room and take a nap or whatever. And so that's self-pres. So I'm probably number one-on-one or sexual, and then self-pres, and then social is probably the bottom for me. So.
Awesome. Well, just really thank you for your time and your sharing,
Sure.
and just love to hear your passion and just get to feel your 5-ness and how you experience it. And so I just, if I would love to hear if your beloved wife was up for it, it's just to hear about like what it's like to work with, she's a 9 and you're a 5, and the way you adapt to create harmony, and that could be a lot of fun. But that'll be part 2 if your guys are up for it. But
We can do a couples thing. That'd be fun.
That could be a lot of fun. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brad. Really, really appreciate it. And
Sure.
Just many thanks. And I'll send you the link, and you'll be, a type 5 star.
Internet famous.
Yeah. All right. Well,
all right.
Great to be with you.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah. Many
Cheers.
blessings.
Namaste.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.